everybody.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Lore and Valor, Joint Fires. I am joined again today by Joelle Presby. Our third musketeer, Kacey Ezell, gave us some BS excuse about retiring from the Air Force and moving her entire life back from Japan to the States. So she can't join us for a week or two. So we didn't want to keep going with the Arcane reviews without Kacey. So we decided to do something a little different this week and talk about our experience with science fiction and fantasy conventions.
Yes, cons,
Yeah.
con life,
Con life, cons,
being a guest, panelist, all that stuff.
Yeah, fan, guest, panelist, all that sort of thing. So personally, I have been to 3 different cons in my whole life, despite being a lifelong nerd. Oh, actually, no, wait, I'm sorry, 4. I forgot about 4 when we were talking earlier. I went to a Star Trek convention in Reno, Nevada when I was 11 years old. And John Delancey was the only guest. And that was, the best thing about that was the swag. I got a big book of starships that was, I think I haven't seen it since, so it might only been available at that con. And then I went to Denver Comic Con, still as a fan, hadn't written any, I had written things, but hadn't gotten anything published. I've been to LibertyCon 3 times now, and I went to Superstars once. So that's my con experience. Joelle, when did you start going to cons, and what's like the timeline overview of your con attendance as a fan and as a pro?
So I first attended conventions my very first con was in 2004. It was LostCon in California. And I met this guy named Andy Presby, who I later married. And David Weber was the guest of honor, who I later co-wrote with. So that was a rather, I had no idea that going to conventions was going to change my life so much.
It can be very productive.
And in a way, it was all the Navy's fault, because I graduated and commissioned from the United States Naval Academy, and I'd done well enough there that I was sent immediately to grad school. I was one of 30 people sent to Naval Postgraduate School.
Wow.
And my vacation time, my leave days started accruing only after graduation. But the college, the postgraduate school still took regular time off. So there was a time off for Thanksgiving, and there was a time off for holiday leave period, which always somehow manages to include all of Christmas and none of Hanukkah. And so if I was going to go to Ohio, which is out of the leave area, for Christmas, I could not take Thanksgiving and go home.
Okay.
They don't trust ensigns to have any leave debt, I guess. So I was going to this thing online, Baen Books, who at that point I really didn't know much about, but I liked they were on the cover, the spines of a lot of books I liked. There was a Baen Books web board. And so there are all these internet people who also liked the same kind of books as I did, kept telling me about this thing called conventions. And they really wanted me to come to one and meet me in person, which meant I was convinced that I was going to wake up in a hotel bathtub covered with ice, missing a kidney. And
this was during the early days of the internet, or not early days of the internet, but the beginning of the peak of the internet, where everything was a little sketchy and scary and felt that way.
Yeah, I think Facebook was only available to Ivy Leaguers at that point. It was early days.
Which probably means you as an Annapolis grad too, just to be real. You could have had it if you wanted it. But go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt too much.
So I found some fellow Naval Academy people who were in town who I could check up with to come and save me and help track down my kidney if I needed them. And I went to LostCon, and one of the strange internet people sat down at this table with 20 friends, all of whom I knew by screen names, and they all had these little badges, mostly that didn't have actual names on them. They had things like Bear on them. Ray Bear, who is Ray Chatterjee, was the key friend who organized it all and sat me down and paid for my breakfast and had this brilliant idea. He was a Navy veteran, so you would think he would know better, but he sent one of his minion people off to go find the only other naval officer that he knew at the con, who was Andy Presby, and introduced Ensign Joelle Mann, please meet Lieutenant Andy Presby. And so I promptly spent the next 2 days of the convention hiding from him because I had just graduated from the Naval Academy, where the captains and the commanders are really kind, nice people. And anytime they notice something wrong, the midshipmen don't know it, but they turn around and they grab a lieutenant by the back of the collar and say, go scream at that midshipman and make sure they never do this thing again. And so lieutenants are like hell on earth in the minds of midshipmen. I just graduated. It was November. I graduated in May. There was no way I wanted anything to do with the lieutenant. Poor Andy.
Nice. It's a symbol.
Andy, he got a stomach bug and was stuck in his hotel room vomiting for most of the next day and a half.
That's terrible.
So I thought he was leaving me alone and giving me space.
Yeah, just not as voluntarily as you might have thought. Yeah. No, that's crazy. Yep, I have not my first, but I wrapped it around my lamp. So hold on a second, guys. Here. So that's likewise, I just have it hung here. For the second LibertyCon with all the various tabs. I've got the Heinlein Society, Pay It Forward, Tanstaffel, Shines the Name, Starship Troopers 60th anniversary, and then my little author badge on it because I had some short fiction out at that point, which, I'm sure it's pretty common, but I definitely felt the imposter syndrome coming on when I stuck that on my badge with 3 short stories out. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm an author. Yeah, I've got like 10,000 words of, well, I'm long-winded, so maybe more like 18 to 20,000 words of published fiction. I'll just call myself an author. It's fine.
Yeah. But to share equivalent stories, I think you didn't meet your spouse at a con, but I think maybe you met Kacey at a con.
I met Kacey for the first time at a con. So the story, I've told this story before, but Kacey Ezell, my friendship with her is kind of interesting because it was very much a Tom Kratman thing. Because Tom, who is the senior partner in our book, The Romanov Rescue, he kind of is the focal point who brought in the disparate junior authors and kind of mashed a couple different ideas we were all having together to create this alternate history series. So Tom, before that year's LibertyCon, where I met Kacey, he has a rule that he will not read a friend's work unless it's already published. He'll read friends' books that are out there, or he is the editor. Like he will not look at a potential manuscript. Like if he's looking at it, he's agreed to publish. He's agreed that he's working with you on it, right? So he won't read it just to tell you what he thinks about it or give you feedback or anything like that. And the reason is because Tom Kratman, not being the most reserved, I don't want to say, it's not like he's completely untactful all the time, but he's very upfront and forward, and he's not going to sugarcoat things, and he's lost friends.
He knows it, and he knows he has a tendency towards bluntness that is perhaps not appreciated. Yeah.
So I knew not to send that. Like I knew this about him. I did not send things to Tom. Right. So the first novel, I'd been friends with Tom for years at this point, but never asked him to look at my writing. I respected his boundaries. So I've completed my first novel. This is not a convention story, but tangents are kind of our stock and trade. So here you go. I'd completed my first novel, which is a military fantasy. It's modern level technology, but posits the existence of magic and the involvement of the various mythological pantheons being real and having an effect on the world, though a limited effect. You don't get to call down the avatar of Zeus and solve your problem.
So it sounds like marketing would call it urban fantasy, regardless of whether it all happens in a farm.
Yeah, urban military fantasy, I guess, might be the way to put it. And it's maybe more properly epic urban modern military fantasy. It's Clash of the Titans meets Band of Brothers with sprinklings of the Battlestar Galactica reboot. Hopefully the good stuff, not the ending, which kind of went off the rails. So anyway, that's what the book is, and I hope that sees the light of day sometimes after I'm done with the couple projects I've got now. I'm going to get back to that book and hopefully pitch it to Bain at some point in the next few years. So anyway, like I'm not going to send it to Tom, right? But I do get an offer from a smaller press to publish it, and I almost sold it to him. and there's nothing wrong with it's a good organization run by a good dude. But being me, I kind of wanted to get a traditional house to do it, like somebody I knew, somebody who put out a lot of military sci-fi and some good fantasy. I wanted Baen to publish it. But the only person I knew at Baen was Tom, and I knew Tom didn't look at friends' manuscripts. My wife was under no such compunctions. So Michelle reaches out to Tom.
We have so much in common. You have no idea.
Yeah. Michelle reaches out to Tom and says, "Hey, Tom, I know you don't want to engage in nepotism, and I know you have hesitation to look at friends' work to avoid hurting their feelings, but Justin is considering selling this book to a small house, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I think it's right up Baen's alley, and I think someone should look at it. What do you think?" And his response was, "Okay, I promised God, no lesser a personage than God Almighty, that I would not read a friend's work just to read a friend's work and get feedback or try to help them out because I don't want to lose the friend. But I know a couple people who I know are proficient, talented writers and who don't know Justin and therefore can offer an objective opinion about his work." And Kacey Ezell was one of them. Kacey was so kind. She read the entire book cover to cover in a very short period of time and offered an equal amount of, here's where I can tell that Justin is a new author, and here's where he does very well, and I think this book is definitely worth developing. So that was my first interaction with Kacey Ezell. We were not yet friends, but she read my whole damn book and offered a detailed critique of it and made
which is a solid reason to consider her a friend.
Yeah, no, she was a friend.
Even if all of it was, this is all the thing that's wrong with it.
Yeah, she was definitely a friend after that. Because we all know, and those of you who are just starting out will soon realize, if you're watching this and you're an aspiring author, like your time, as soon as you get that first glimmer of success as an author, your time immediately becomes platinum. It becomes your most valuable resource so quickly. So taking the time out to read a novel from someone you don't even know, that is a huge act of Christian charity.
And no one becomes a writer without also loving reading, but there's a huge difference between reading a polished, copy edited final draft and reading a draft that, even if the person eventually is going to get it to that level, is still just a draft.
Yeah, and in an honest analysis of that first draft that she saw, I don't think it was crap, but it was not there. It was not there. There's plenty of things that an editor could reasonably close the cover on it and be like, yeah, nope, not ready. Go try again. So yeah, no, I was very grateful to her for that. And then we met at that LibertyCon, and we both got roped into the Romanov rescue, and we've been friends ever since. So LibertyCon was pivotal to that, and we would not be friends without it. Well, I mean, we probably would be online friends, but yeah, no, the convention is where, a lot of stuff was happening via email and Facebook, but the convention is where it all got solidified. So yeah, absolutely vital.
When Andy and I met, I was getting a math-focused degree using oceanography to find submarines, which is labeled operations research, and was later very useful in my naval officer career. But Andy was doing the military equivalent of shooting himself in the foot as a submarine officer by getting a degree in spacecraft engineering, which doesn't have a whole lot to do with submarines. It doesn't have nothing to do with submarines. There are submarine officers who go on to be astronauts, and Andy did apply for that several times, but there are not a lot of those people. I believe there are 2 total right now. And neither of them was selected during the periods when Andy was a prime candidate. But he loves that stuff, and he was going to conventions in order to introduce himself to science fiction authors and say, hey, I'm getting this degree in spacecraft engineering, and also I love your stories. Would you like me to help you make your spacecraft a little more science and a little less fantasy? And overwhelmingly, the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I mean, writers get a lot of people saying, help me be a writer, but they don't get a lot of people saying, let me help you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's as a knuckle dragging artillery officer who someday intends to write space opera frequently, yeah, no, that offer is invaluable. Like, because I'm not like, while I have a base understanding of physics, I got a C plus at West Point. While I have a base understanding of physics, that's a long way from understanding orbital mechanics and the mechanical restrictions on a vessel that has to withstand vacuum and voyage for months and months and perhaps years on end. Yeah, no, I can see why he would be instantly popular at the convention.
Taking that point sideways, Andy and I later as panelists at conventions have in the past given a very popular program event where we go into various free or not very expensive software tools that you can use to make travel a game that you're going to DM or your science fiction more accurate by looking at actual astronomical data and plugging in some numbers and seeing how long it takes to get from here to there. So
if you're at whatever percentage of C that you can accelerate to, yeah.
Well, you can, depending on which tool you're using, you can plug in a lot of different things and have something else do the math for you. Nice. Or check the math you're already doing.
I will check in with you for that later, and then archive it somewhere so that when I'm not writing Earthbound stuff, I actually can go back to that. Although I am not Heinlein, and I probably will not put my orbital mechanics on the page the way he used to sometimes. But
yeah. I've seen a lot of people giving writing advice to never do that, but I like to do the math, and if I've done the math, why not include some of the math? As long as it doesn't drag it down too much, Well,
and it all depends. Like that's a good craft question. What we can tangent on that for a little bit too is with some people, it's gonna increase your standing. With other people, if you stay there too long, they're gonna
right. It's all a balance.
Yeah,
but I mean, you to some extent, if you're gonna write in a science fiction world, you can't skip it entirely because you got to know: is this the next day, or is this 5 minutes from now? They're getting the message.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair. I would say what the argument I would always make. So, to invoke her name because she's another contributor to this podcast channel, and I've written stuff with her. Mona Lisa Foster maintains that, it's like the realism generally doesn't matter. People are there about their emotional involvement with characters. And I think that's true of the stories she writes. And I think that emotional involvement with the characters is objectively for novelists more important, TM,
Yeah.
But I also agree with you that realism as a tool is a powerful tool to help with the suspension of disbelief if you can pursue it. It is also, I think, subordinate to internal consistency,
right?
Like, and tone, that it's like, okay, I've let you know you're watching Doctor Who. Don't worry about it. Like,
right.
I should rephrase. You're watching Doctor Who from a few years ago, nothing recent because it went off the rails. But like, you're watching an episode of Doctor Who or you're watching a Star Wars movie. It's like, yeah, no, we get it. Like, the X-Wing is banking like a P-51. I understand that we're not in a world where physics matters. Cool.
Right.
But it still matters in Star Wars when you're like, oh, well, the Admiral Holdo is going to win this engagement by going to hyperspace into the enemy formation, and that will very neatly wrap up the battle and kill all of their capital and support vessels. That still matters, even though you've established that physics don't matter in Star Wars. It still matters because you've presented an easy answer to every fleet engagement we've ever seen. And if you have half a brain, you're going to see that and be like, well, they should just have a bunch of unmanned.
They always do that.
Yeah, they should have a bunch of unmanned large missiles with hyperdrives on them with droids to calculate their vectors, and the fleet should never close to within targeting distance for a laser. You should just hyperspace missiles at each other, like, and I don't even have to be a physicist.
And it doesn't fit onto the same screen for the video look.
Well, and I get that, like, part of the reason people don't do realistic space combat very frequently is because the distances involved are so great that it would be impossible to have enemy and friendly combatants on the screen at the same time. So I understand why they do that. Like, I feel like shooting combat from inside the CNC of a space vessel is one way to approach that, but that is kind of limiting, and it's not as flashy as X-Wings and TIE fighters dogfighting. So like I do understand why they go to that extent. But even if you are going to do that, even if you're full space opera and you say screw physics and Newtonian mechanics can bite my ass, you still need internal consistency. Like Newtonian mechanics need to bite your ass in the same way.
Exactly. Yes.
So little craft tangent there.
That craft tangent and internal consistency, David Weber, through his Honorverse, he changed things over time, developing new technology that the Havenites have this, the Manticorans have this,
Lax,
Solarians have this other stuff.
And
And so Andy and 8 other people became kind of his core tech support people, where he'd say, all right, I'm doing this. And these folks would say, all right, David, you're brilliant. And this is why, this is how that works. So use these words, because that fits with these words you've used before. And if you don't like being brilliant in that way, here are 2 other ways you could be brilliant instead. But let us know which way you're choosing so we continue to keep it consistent going forward.
Yeah. I mean, it's even got a name, right? He's part of Bu Ships.
Bu9.
Bu9.
Because there are 9 of them. Bu Ships is within the Honorverse. Okay. That's the group that on the Empire of Manticore develops the new ships. Yeah. So, David wrote these things and he'd been writing them forever. For the 20th anniversary, he was going to have a fictional nonfiction thing come out. And that's how I got my start as a writer, that Andy was going to be one of the core people, Bu9 Incorporated, to write this thing. And then Andy got a different job and was too busy. And so I started helping, and I wrote a short story. Have I told you this before?
I knew that you were involved with Weber early on, but I'm not sure I've heard this specific story. So go ahead.
Okay. So the Honorverse Companion is getting written, and I'm doing a whole lot of project management work for it and some of the writing as well. And Andy is super busy, but you know what? He lives in the same house as me. And so I could print something out and say, all right, you've got 5 minutes before dinner while I finish the rice. Check those numbers to see if that actually matches how you have said these things work. And I could go back to Tom Pope and say, yeah, we can print that and add it to the final copy.
Nice.
And so again, Tony Weisskopf is wanting things, and David said, I can't do it. And so I'm listening in as one of the Bu9 outsiders that Bain wants a short story set in the Honorverse to publish on the website. And I, at this point, have written 7 novels that I haven't shown to anyone. Okay, I've written 6 novels that I haven't shown to anyone. The very first one that I finished in high school, I submitted because I'm crazy.
Ballsy.
It didn't get published, just in case you were wondering. I'm not Christopher Polini.
Yeah. That's an interesting author to talk about, but I don't want to get off on that rabbit hole. So keep going with your story.
So anyway, I wrote an Honorverse short story, and I showed it to Andy. And he showed it to his friend, Tom Pope. And Tom Pope showed it to Gina Robinson, who is at that point David Weber's personal assistant, and also to Sharon Rice Weber. And I believe both of them showed it to David, who showed it to Tony, who bought it. And at that point, I didn't know Tom Pope had it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, on one hand, it's like, oh, you didn't ask me. On the other hand, it sold.
I know. And then they went further of, oh, by the way, can you also double it in length, because we want it to end on a cliffhanger relating to this particular book that you haven't read yet because it hasn't been published yet.
Nice.
And we will continue to pay you, even though you wrote it at the certain length because you saw that was the length that they publish on Bain.com.
Yeah.
But they didn't then just give me that flat amount. They did the per word count extending out to the other length.
Good of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never, like, in the things.
And then I became eligible for SIFWA because that was my first sale.
And this was back in 2000.
6,
7.
I think, or 8.
2009. Okay. Yeah, I've been eligible for SIFWA for many years now and have not joined it.
Yeah. I've joined and I've been a member ever since.
Yeah. Though we have different philosophies on
Yes,
this, and that is fine.
And I was aware then that I was going against the grain as a Bane writer.
There are plenty of Bane writers who are SIFWA members. There are just plenty who are
not
vociferously not members of SIFWA, and I have friends on both sides of that, and it's
yeah.
I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to necessarily judge anyone for their choice. I just know for me, it was like, ooh, yeah, they'd be mad at me real quick if they ever actually, got to know me. So I guess I'll just avoid that whole minefield.
Yeah. And do we want to talk about the Nebula convention, or?
I mean, if we want to talk about the unpleasant stuff now, we can. I'm trying to think of what else to cover. Before we get into like the unfortunately hyper politicized stuff, like I will say too that like for anyone thinking about starting to attend cons, I think it's important to understand what con you're attending and what its goal is. So like the very first con I went to was a Star Trek convention when I was 11. But then I went to Denver Comic Con, and Comic Cons are way different than science fiction and fantasy cons that are more focused on, well, frankly, on books.
Yes.
Like LibertyCon is really, really, I mean, there's popular culture stuff there, but it's really focused on authors and books and, fans of people who are committed fans of novels and novel series and the pros themselves, rather than, let's get together and talk about the MCU or even related stuff like The Expanse. Again, there are panels on that stuff there, but it's not the focus. Comic cons are much more about like, what's on Netflix, what's on, what is Marvel coming out with, what is DC coming out with. I enjoyed the experience, but it was the literature track was very SML. Kevin J. Anderson was there, but I didn't get to meet him at that point. And then you have LibertyCon, which is fans and pros, right? And then you have the other con I've attended is Superstars in Colorado Springs, where basically if you're going to that, you're either aspiring or you're early in your career or you're teaching there, because it is all about becoming a better writer and succeeding as a writer and, developing your craft and your business acumen as a writer. Because that's another thing. If you intend to do it as a living, congratulations, you're now an entrepreneur, whether you wanted to be or not. Even if you're traditionally published, you're still probably an entrepreneur. So just to lay down that kind of,
at least a small businessman.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I just wanted to get those distinctions out there. So if you're going to San Diego Comic-Con, I'm sure that's a great event. I've never been, but that's not really the place to promote yourself as an author.
I went to San Diego Comic-Con for one day, and if I'm not confusing my cons, that was as an attendee.
Yeah.
It was the next convention that fit with my Navy schedule after Lost Con, and I had a San Diego 2-week training event, and so the weekend in between the 2 weeks of training was off, but I needed to be in San Diego, and so I went over to Comic-Con and I attended some panels on costuming. And it wasn't until halfway through the panel, me sitting in the audience, that I realized that the people up at that table who were talking about the attire that the Lord of the Rings folks were wearing for the movies, those were the people who designed those costumes. They were the professional costumers who did them.
Nuts.
And it was like, wow. And that completely blew my mind and made a inappropriate expectations for the small book focused literary cons for the skill level of the costumers, who again have much higher skill level than me, but they're not professionals in the field if they're going to be at a costume panel, in Roanoke, Virginia.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
They're people. They are highly skilled amateurs, and they're not going to be able to answer. Actually, if you want to do something that looks like the same as on the movies for your masquerade, you have to pick a different material because the video makes it look different. And It's like, whoa.
Yeah. Or like the famous one that I remember from the extended features on Return of the King is the flail that the Witch King of Angmar uses, that
Yeah.
like Peter Jackson kept saying bigger, bigger, and they're like, this looks stupid, and he's like, trust me, it'll look amazing on the film. You know, so I remember that story too.
Yeah.
I guess we can get into the minefield aspect of cons. I'd like to, if we can, like, rather than trying to say, oh, do this, don't do that, what I would say for people new to convention attendance is just understand what you're doing, and what's likely to happen. You know, if you want to wade in and have political arguments online or at a convention, just understand what you might be getting yourself in for. If you choose to abstain from them, understand what that implies, like, as well. And we kind of represent. I'm not like, well, one, I don't have his career yet, but I don't have the vociferous online presence of someone like Larry Correia, that I'm constantly, talking about gun control or whatever the issue is. I mean, constantly is unfair, but he's very vociferous about his opinion on those issues. And I must be in love with V words today, because I keep saying vociferous. He's prone to give his opinion on that sort of thing, and you take a different aspect that I respect and I admire, and I honestly wish I could do, that you tend to refrain from getting too openly political in your opinions, from what I've seen of your online presence.
It's self-protective. I am too moderate. Anybody who feels strongly about politics will hate me, because I will have somewhere towards the center or away from what they would like me to believe.
Yeah.
So I like people to be willing to try to read my books.
Yeah. And it's a very logical way to approach things. I will say I have some empathy for your position, because while I can't claim to be a centrist. I'm not truly moderate. In fact, I'm very right-wing on some things. The fact is, I
believe strongly in space exploration, but
that too.
Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans really care.
Yeah. I mean, that's just true. It's always a side issue. Like, if you think about, if we could break away just a decent chunk of the budget that we use on other things for space exploration, how much further we could be. Yeah. But I will say that I have some empathy, because I was not an ardent, and still not an ardent, Trump supporter, which, even if you are super conservative, gun owning, very radically in support of free speech, you're still kind of a political orphan at that point, just aligned with the right wing. If you didn't fall in behind President Trump, like, people still associate with me. I haven't been shunned, but it is political homelessness in a large degree. But all that to say, whatever approach you take, understand the implications of the approach you're taking. Because if you get into that world and you get into that debate, it's going to be very difficult to disengage from it. And there are constantly people trying to pull you into it.
Yeah. But so, you're a writer, or you're starting to become a writer. You want to be a panelist on something, and you apply to a convention, and they add you, and you're a guest. It has happened that even people who've been invited as guests of honor later get disinvited. And there have been cases where somebody says the wrong thing on a panel, and then they're disinvited for the rest of the con. That happened to Mercedes Lackey. And in that case, it was a remote panel anyway, so it was being recorded, and so they could go back and say, no, what we thought happened really happened. And you can certainly argue about whether there should have been an apology faster, or if it was completely inappropriate, or if it was understandable to have flicked person of color. But the thing is, for the person who's a panelist, you can go in thinking that you're going to do a great thing for your career and connect with your readers, and actually you end up getting a black eye. Recently at LibertyCon, the writer Stephanie Burke was accused of having committed a faux pas, or a lot of faux pas.
Saying something transphobic, right?
And, well, the accuser has since apologized. But she was...
That's rare.
Well, because of this situation, I'll explain the situation and then we can talk more about it. So she had finished a panel and was waiting with other panelists about to have another thing, and a person related to ConOps whose name has been shared, but I didn't write it down, so I don't remember, came and demanded that she come to ConOps, and then loudly in the hallway on the way there in public was making the accusation of ethnic slurs and transphobia comments. Stephanie herself is a disabled Black writer who writes genderqueer romance, among other things, and her one of her children is trans. She strongly objected to this characterization. I mean, this is a direct attack on her readership. Her readership would drop her if they believe these things to be true.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps someone like Larry Correia, that kind of attack, if somebody were yelling at Larry Correia that actually he doesn't know how to shoot and he made up his entire history and
Yeah.
he owns nothing more than a squirt gun and he photoshopped all his awards for rifle, it would be that level of an attack.
And in point of fact, like a lot of Larry Correia's detractors, they'll come around to the point that Larry was never in the military, and then are quickly shut down because Larry's never claimed he was in the military, nor has he given himself airs that he was in the military. So, and most veterans really enjoy his work, so that does not resonate. But yeah, people do try to attack when they decide to engage in this sort of activity. They will try to find something that will work to damage that writer. Yeah.
And so in the week or so that's followed, Stephanie has received some semi-apologies that are not very clearly, that they're maybe not good enough. My personal opinion is they're not good enough for the harm that was done to her.
Yeah. And
she was removed from her panels, and she was not guest of honor. She was a 20 plus years attendee at LibertyCon, being on panels. And so she spent a lot of her own money to help be part of the programming for this con, and understandably thought that these were her people. And so there's been, on more of the left side of the fandom, people saying, all right, we need to change how this goes, and writers, panelists, it needs to be okay for everybody to pull out their phone and make their own recording of any panel they're on so that they can defend themselves. There needs to be a policy of, if you're accused of something, you don't announce it to the world that you're accused, and you get to have an investigation before there's
and I understand, like, I understand it's like, this is not a criminal trial, ergo the burden of evidence is not what you need to convict someone of a crime. But I think socially, because this is all, ultimately, this is a social compact. This is how we treat each other outside of a courtroom. Socially, I think we need to accept a higher standard of proof. We need to insist on a higher standard of proof if we're accusing someone of bigotry or transphobia or anything like that. That it's like, no, just because like, it feels like for the last several years, the trend has been towards, if someone was accused of saying something transphobic, bigoted,
something insulting.
Yeah. What's that?
Something insulting, generally. You
something
don't have
insulting.
To list which they're insulting.
Something insulting of an officially or unofficially protected class. The assumption was guilt. And I don't think that's a way to operate. I understand there are genuine injustices in the world. I'm not denying it. I'm understanding that there are, deep issues that are rooted in the foundations of our country that have not gone away and have morphed into different forms. I'm not denying the existence of actual racism in the world, not for a moment. But the number of actual racists in the world, I believe, is much smaller than your average Twitter mob would want you to believe. And it saddens me that in our fandom, I never meant to get this political on this channel. I'm sorry, guys, but this is how I really feel about this. It saddens me. I can take it
sideways if you want to.
In just a minute, let me finish the thought, and then we can get off this topic. But it really saddens me that obviously if somebody is saying something genuinely bigoted, if you could find a scrap of writing or a con where Larry Correa says something unkind about LGBTQ individuals or a certain ethnic minority or something like that, then please bring it forward. But the guy is the Antichrist to his opponents, and he's never said anything bigoted that I can find. And I've been reading his work and his blog and seeing him on panels for more than a decade now. And it saddens me that there seem to be a lot of people out there who are very eager to find someone they can accuse of being a bigot so that they can show the world how anti-racist they are. And I feel like as long as that is true, it's going to be a distraction and a matter of toxicity in a world that I love very much, the world of science fiction and fantasy. So that's where I stand on it. I think sometimes folks of my political leanings can be a little too broad brush about everyone left of center, but this is a phenomenon I've seen taking hold left of center, and it's very unfortunate. There, I'm done. Sorry.
Okay. I also like conventions a lot, and I want them to be welcoming places, and whatever your stripe is, I want you to be able to go there and find the type of fiction you love. This particular thing, you're saying that it's not legal, but it can become legal.
That's true. Yeah.
Stephanie Burke could, if she chose, sue LibertyCon and sue the individual, and she might be able to get actual damages.
That's true.
She can point at her sales before and after, and if she's willing to spend the money on it. And especially for a case where if you have your own recording and you can prove that you didn't say what you're accused of, I don't want this to become a case where conventions can't afford to have a convention because some staff member might be a jerk, and panelists can't afford to go to a convention because some staff member might be a jerk and they might be smeared publicly. And where the only kind of conventions that can afford to exist are the DragonCon level, which again is a wonderful convention, but it's nice to have the 250 person convention that happens in the middle of Iowa too.
Yeah.
Because not everybody can afford to go and spend $400 a night in Atlanta.
Yeah. And while there's always, I feel like interpersonal con drama has been a thing since time immemorial because humans are humans and we love to get dramatic. Taking LibertyCon as an example, I don't think there's been a case like that ever. And it's largely, there's a lot more right-wingers at LibertyCon than there are at places like, Balticon or, some of the others. But there's still plenty of left-leaning folks at LibertyCon, and they managed to run it without stepping on a rake and hitting themselves into a face, at least so far, knock on wood. Yeah. And it's my hope as the pendulum swings, we're able to come to a more centered place and be able to enjoy our stuff together, because we're all there because we love science fiction and fantasy books. We should be able to enjoy this without going after each other. Maybe that's naive of me to think that. I'm still young in the field, but I would really appreciate being able to, talk about the latest Every Weber book or talk about the latest Liaden Universe book or whatever it is without it having to be a fight, except for about the quality of the book. Let's debate dirty things. Let's debate whether, Weber goes too far when he describes a multi-drive missile in great and loving detail for everyone. Is that to your taste? Is it not to your taste? Why or why not? Let's have a scotch and beer fueled debate about that. That sounds like fun to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry to get on a negative rant, guys. I really want to keep the channel, for folks listening, and Joelle, for you too. I know I was on my soapbox for a long time, but it is my sincere hope, that we come back to a place where the tensions ease and we can all enjoy our stuff together again. I don't know that what'll happen, but I hope it happens.
I just want to say that I really appreciate the people who are trying to get through and make these things work out. I think especially of the one time I can remember when I was on a panel and I realized afterwards that I had been very stupid. It was a social media panel and I said something very rude about older people. and Gail Martin was on the panel, and she is not my age. And she responded immediately by verbally backhanding me. And that was wonderful because it meant that
it was immediate correction.
Yes. And it was the right thing to
do. Yeah. Yeah.
And I know what I was thinking, and I didn't mean what actually came out of my mouth, but I still said what came out of my mouth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so
and we respond well to that, right?
That we have more people who will backhand the wrong-headed comments in the moment and just, take charge of things.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like, if you have a problem, like, I have a lot of respect for someone. If you have a problem with something I'm saying, you think it's wrong, or you think I'm being an ass, like, let's talk about it. Like, I'm capable of that. So talk to me about it. Yeah. Like, don't clutch your pearls and retire to Twitter. Like, be like, hey, Watson, that's not cool. Like, I think what you just said is bullshit, and here's why. Oh, okay. Well, I have occasionally, I know it doesn't seem like it, I have occasionally admitted I was wrong. When someone was able to provide evidence. So yeah, I much prefer somebody to be like, hey bro, that's not cool, than to, like, take it up with everyone else in the world but me.
And there have been some changes to conventions that have been because of the pandemic, but have also opened up attendance in ways that conventions were not open before. With holding remote conventions where, I very much miss being face-to-face and in person. But because things were remote, you can get panelists from all over the world that you couldn't before, because you couldn't afford to pay everybody's travel fare and they couldn't afford to pay their own. And so you ended up in the past only getting the top of the world sellers who you could afford to come be your guest of honor, Neil Gaiman kind of person, or someone who can fund it themselves because they're a trust fund baby. And that's not an accurate cross section of the best writers. That's just the wealthiest writers.
Yeah, you're not wrong. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to an event at LibertyCon. I wrote Dabare Snake Launcher, which is partially set in Africa. And then I tried to find some science fiction and fantasy writers from Africa who would be willing to read it and give me feedback. Yeah. And so I've made some friends through that who are currently living and working in Nigeria because they are Nigerian, and that's where they are. And but they've, they're writers and they're interested in networking and they want to connect, and all of them have attended some conventions in the US as guest panelists and having some side conversations with them. Okay, so they get put on panels mostly with each other to talk about, African science fiction and fantasy and speculative fiction, which is great value to the attendees, but there's no little screen over in the green room to talk to the other writers and make connections and get invited to an anthology. And oh, by the way, would you like to co-write a novel with me? None of that stuff's happening. Yeah. And so
and that's vital to a young writer's career.
Yeah.
Absolutely vital.
Some of these people are not young writers. Like, they've been doing this for a long time. And if they were if they're living in New York City, they would not need me at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also like, I feel like it's perfectly fine to highlight a portion of their identity and that perspective in a panel, but it's like, don't forget they're also just, they're writers too, they should be on the panel. What do they write? They write space opera. Okay, well, they should be on the space opera panel. It's like, it should be like, it's such a fine line, because obviously, yes, bring in a multitude of perspectives. Don't treat it like a bingo card. It's like, oh no, I've read science fiction from an African author. I'm a better person than you. It's like, come on, I'm excited for that event too. And as long as they didn't schedule me for a panel at the same time, I'll definitely
you won't
be there.
Scheduled for a panel at the same time.
Okay. You already talked to Rich. Yeah.
I'm on the program guide. I'm before the panels start. So if you choose to eat breakfast on Saturday, you can come eat breakfast for free in my place and meet my people.
Well, I will be there. I will be there. I told you I'd be there. I'll be there.
Well, hopefully everybody can, fit in the door if they need to. It could be a pretty tight squeeze.
I mean, if it's like you've got like Weber and Correa, and I don't know if Correa's going to be there. If you've got like, enough authors who matter to be there, I can definitely give up my slot. I'm still a young dude. So I definitely want it to be the best possible event for them that it can be.
And to further explain to the audience, what's going on here is this is a test case. I'm holding a breakfast time meet and greet by Zoom for 5 folks, and I've personally tracked down and twisted arms to get around 45 writers, editors, publishers to agree to stop in and say hello and eat a Danish and drink my coffee, and say, talk to these people, get them to have an opportunity to have just a conversation. And if it goes well, there's a possibility of doing this on a more formal, bigger audience for Dragon Con later, which would be, more valuable for everybody.
Yeah. No, that sounds cool. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to meeting them and hanging out and meeting you in person because
yes.
I've been aware of your work for a while, and we've been in a couple anthologies together, and obviously we're now doing YouTube and podcasts together, but I've never met you in person. So that'll be exciting. I'm very excited for LibertyCon. So excited. Like it really is. There's just so many people I don't get to see except for at LibertyCon, and every year there are new people at LibertyCon I meet who I can't wait to see them again the next year at LibertyCon. So I'm so glad it's back on. So excited to do that, to end this on a more positive note. It's going to be so exciting. We'll definitely get together for an after action review of LibertyCon, talk about, I think we might be doing that on Kacey's channel rather than mine though, so she can get that LibertyCon flavor ex post facto vicariously and all other polysyllabic adjectives I can think of. No, it's going to be fun. It's going to be so exciting. So we're running up on an hour now at 52 minutes. Is there anything else you really want to communicate to the folks about cons before we call it a day?
Let's see. I have a question for the audience. Please tell us what conventions you like best and what conventions you're thinking about going to next. So we can, write them. I don't know. Send us emails or write them below in the chat if you're willing to share with the world.
That's a great question. I'll
see you guys too.
Yeah. And on the audio version, if you guys are listening to this in your car, Anchor FM allows me to put polls on these, so I'll put that as a poll question. What cons would you like to attend? What cons have you attended, and where do you think you're going? So cool. I think that's about it for the day. If you enjoyed this content, please consider leaving us a comment with what your favorite cons are. Hit like, subscribe, and hit the bell if you could. And if you're listening to this, please leave us a 5-star review on your podcast venue of choice. We are available on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, Amazon Music, and I'm forgetting something, but most of the major podcast outlets. Thanks so much for joining me today, Joelle.
Thank you.
Links to Joelle's works will be in the comments below and in the liner notes on the podcast. That's all the time we have for Lore and Valor today. See you next time, and until then, keep up the fire.
Bye.